On the 21st of March, a China Eastern Airlines plane was flying between Kunming and Guangzhou. It departed Kunming at around 1 p.m. and at about 2:20 p.m., the Boeing 737 plummeted over 20,000 feet in just over a minute. It seemed to regain altitude before dropping rapidly once again. In the end, it crashed in China's Guangxi province, killing 132 people. Now, reports suggest that the crash was intentional. A Wall Street Journal report says someone in the cockpit intentionally crashed the jet. Chinese investigators have led the crash inquiry, but U.S. officials are also involved because the plane is U.S.-made. Investigators have not flagged any mechanical or flight control issues, which led the U.S. officials to look into the actions of the pilot. It says the sudden nosedive was intentional. The pilots did not respond to repeated calls, both from air traffic controllers and nearby planes during this descent. The black box data suggesting that the plane took a nosedive after someone pushed the controls. The investigation, though, did not find any indication of a technical malfunction. It could also be possible that someone broke into the cockpit and ended up causing this crash. The cockpit voice recorder was also damaged during the crash. It's unclear whether any information can be retrieved from it. China Eastern, on the other hand, says such a scenario is highly unlikely. Authorities say no emergency code was sent from the plane before the crash. Currently, data restoration and analysis of the damaged black boxes is still in progress. It also said any unofficial speculation may interfere with the accident investigation. The Boeing 737-800 is a workhorse of the global aviation industry. It is part of a family of Boeing aircraft that has the safest flying record. It is a widely flown predecessor to Boeing 737 MAX, but lacks the systems linked to the fatal 737 MAX crashes. China Eastern grounded its entire fleet of 737-800 planes after the crash, but it soon resumed 737-800 flights in mid-April. Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal report has now been censored on Chinese social media. The hashtag topics China Eastern black boxes are banned on Weibo. Chinese users are also unable to share posts on the incident in the WeChat groups. And with me on the broadcast this minute is Mikey K, with me from Paris. He's an investigative journalist and a former RAF pilot. Thanks very much, Mikey, for being here with us. What is your assessment of these reports, the data that suggests that the crash was intentional? What do you think was going on inside the cockpit?
Hi, good afternoon. Well, it's without actually having the data from the two black boxes, one being a cockpit voice recorder, the other one being a cockpit data recorder. It's impossible to actually sort of say what definitively happened, and the board of inquiry that is currently ongoing will come out with that information. I think what is very good about this is the fact that there's an element of transparency that will occur with this investigation, because the black boxes have gone to the NTSB, which is effectively the American safety setup, and the NTSB are the best in the world for analyzing this data. So the conclusions that they will come out with are pretty definitive. And it doesn't matter how much China decide to obstruct any of this information getting out through the channels that you just articulated. The information will get out to the global community, the global aviation community. So that's a good thing. I think what is also important to mention here is, and you just alluded to it, is that this was a 737-800, which is a very different aeroplane to the 737 MAX. And Boeing has been plagued by the two accident investigations of the 737 MAX over the last few years, in 2018 with the Lion Air crash and then the Ethiopian Airlines crash. And That was caused by a lot of things, and your viewers can actually Google 737 MAX and look more deeply into the reasons why that occurred. But it all centered around an anti-stalling system called the MCAS on the 737 MAX. And that was put in place because the engines that you would find on the 737-800 on the newer 737 MAX, the engines have been moved slightly, affecting the center of gravity. So this software system, the MCAS system and hardware system that was put in, was designed to ameliorate any center of gravity effects. So that can be pretty much ruled out on the 737-800. I think with the information that we've got at the moment, it's looking slightly more ominous, or very much more ominous. And what comes straight to mind is the Germanwings flight, which was an Airbus. But the Germanwings flight was a flight in 2015 that was going from Barcelona to Dusseldorf, and over the French Alps. It took a very similar flight profile in terms of its trajectory. It was very, very steep, and it literally tent pegged or hit at a very severe angle into the ground, demolishing most of the aircraft. The board of inquiry for that was concluded was the co-pilot, who was a person called Andrew Lubitz, basically took the aircraft when the pilot was out of the cockpit, locked the cockpit door, and then pushed the yoke forward, and basically with suicidal tendencies crashed into the ground. And the board of inquiry also concluded there that a doctor had deemed this co-pilot, Lubitz, and had diagnosed him with psychological problems, but Lubitz hadn't involved, hadn't involved his employer, Germanwings, in this case. So this information subsequently came out afterwards in the board of inquiry, which led to the final conclusions being made, which was right. This was an attempt by the co-pilot, or this was an activity which was created by the co-pilot to crash the aircraft into the ground. What happened after that was a rule was made to have two people in the cockpit at all times. So if the pilot wanted to leave and leave the co-pilot in command, then one of the cabin attendants had to come in and take the place of the pilot while the other one was going to relieve himself. However, that in 2017 by Germanwings, that rule was then dismissed, and so they went back to the former regulation, in which people can come and go inside the cockpit, leaving one person inside the cockpit. I think this aspect of the investigation is going to be much more fraught with complexity, because that investigation will have to occur by the Chinese authorities unless someone like the FBI gets involved, which is very doubtful from experience. So I think whilst the NTSB will be able to look at the two flight recorders, the cockpit voice recorder, which will be able to listen to communications within the cockpit, and then the flight data recorder, which is showing very ominous data of the aircraft trajectory and the aircraft profile. What then you also need to have to complement that investigation is the more human factors side. And I think that's going to be potentially problematic in coming to an overall conclusion.
Right. And just a quick comment on how concerning it is that the voice data recorder is damaged. We do not know if the data will be retrieved from that. And to what extent is that a setback to the investigation?
Yeah, it certainly is a setback. I mean, the cockpit voice recorder, will allow investigators to gauge, the type of atmosphere that was in the cockpit. They'll be able to listen to the conversations. They'll be able to listen to any tone in the conversation and get sort of any indications that support what the flight data recorder, the FDR, is actually saying. So it is absolutely instrumental. But as I said, the investigation into the actual the two crew themselves will be fundamental. You can't rule out, as you've already said, that the cockpit could have been breached by someone else. Someone maybe trying to take over the aeroplane, which again is also a factor that needs to be investigated. But in getting to the bottom of those questions, that will need Chinese authorities to be very, very proactive in investigating why this happened. And then there's also the question of how much of that information will actually be supplemented and provided to the board of inquiry, the overall investigative community, in order to come to those conclusions.
Mikey K, appreciate very much for joining us on the broadcast and helping us better understand the process that this investigation is following and the assessment of those reports as well. Thanks very much. WION now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.